Okay. Good evening, and welcome to our next class on the laws of Birchas Hanenin, the blessings on food and any other pleasure that we have. We are up to chapter 4. We're going to do today, hopefully, chapter 4 and chapter 5. We spoke last week in chapter 3 about what we do when there are food that are mixed together, that we're eating food that two types of food that are together that have different blessings. Which blessing do we make? Generally, we make one what is most important to me, what I like better, what's most chashuv, what's the main ingredient in this dish. When it is a grain dish, when something that has bezainis in it, that generally takes precedence, and that becomes the bracha for that food. And obviously, many other details. And this principle is qualified greatly in last week's chapter 3. We're up to chapter 4. You have it? Yeah. Chapter 4, continuing with the laws of blessings. And it gets very like you see already, the laws of blessings, it's not just a very general, kids in Hebrew school learn the different blessings on the different foods, but it's very specific. In many cases, we have to know, when do you say the blessing? What blessing do you say? What after blessing do you say? So in chapter 4, it discusses a meal. So you have a meal, you have a motzi, you have bread, you have challah, you have a bagel, you have a sandwich, and there are other foods on the table as well. You're having a l'chaim and Jack Daniels. You're having some diet barks. You're having fish. You're having salad. You're having desserts. Right? Do they all need their own bracha? You make a separate blessing on them, right? This is what we deal with in chapter 4. So let's begin. The first halacha is where he lays down the principle, which I think we all know already, the general principle that when you make up hamotzi, it covers everything in the meal. A separate blessing need not be recited over food served during a meal, which are integral to the meal, because they are covered by the blessing hamotzi recited over the bread, which is the basis of the meal. This rule even applies when the foods are not eaten with the bread. Similarly, these foods do not require a separate blessing to be recited after eating them, because they are covered by the grace of meal. So we have the blessing before and the blessing after. Neither have to be recited when we're eating food which are they are integral, they are part of the meal. So you make a bracha on hamotzi, and everything else is covered with that. Now, he gives some examples of what this category includes. This category includes foods that are commonly served as the basis of a meal and are not all that commonly eaten at other times of the day, only during a meal. Meaning these are not like snacks. These are foods that we consider it's a meal. Maybe not necessarily with bread, but I'm having lunch, I'm having dinner, I'm having breakfast, I'll eat this food. It's not something that I just grab and eat on the go. Although today it's hard to know, but we eat anything. Like there's no rules today, right? We can have a piece of steak as we're running out of the house, right? And we can eat a little, some chips as a meal, right? So it's hard to know today. But we'll follow what Shulchan Aruch tells us, the different examples of the foods that are generally seen as a meal. Those foods are included in the meal. And other foods, perhaps not, as we'll see soon. Avram, welcome. Good to see you. Do you hear me? Did I see you? As Avram gets it figured out, we'll continue. You hear us now? We hear you now.
I can hear you. Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, we have over here.
Learning began.
We have many Hasidim over here sitting around the table.
All right.
So it's good to see you. And okay, so we are in the middle of chapter 4. The first halacha, we're laying down the principle, the rule of the different blessings that we do or do not have to make while we are having a meal. So the general rule is that once you make hamotzi, we do not have to make a bracha on the other foods that we eat during the meal. And this is specifically foods that are something that we usually eat only during meal time. We don't eat them as a snack at other times during the day. It does not matter whether these are foods that are eaten to accompany bread, like meat, fish, cheese, vegetable, eggs, and salted foods, or whether they are served for sustenance and satiation. Satiation, that word. For example, cabbage, spinach, porridge, and all cooked foods that are not served to accompany bread, but to serve as cooked food for sustenance. So as long as these foods are here for sustenance, whether they are here to accompany bread, like whatever they can, or like a spread, a cream cheese, thing like that, which you usually eat with bread, or it's food for itself, like fish or meat or vegetables, right? Which you're eating for itself, but you're eating it as a meal during the meal. Then these foods do not need its own bracha to make hamoitzi, and it covers pretty much anything in the. However, Halacha Beis Day says if the different law applies, that the food are not integral to the meal, they are not commonly served as the basis of a meal, nor do they frequently accompany bread, nor are they satisfying, but instead are eaten throughout the day, even outside of one's meals. In this category, all types of fruit and the like, whether fresh or cooked, even if they were cooked with meat. If they're eaten without bread, they require a blessing to be recited before partaking of them. So you have, for example, fruit, which is more of a dessert, a sweet that you eat, not as a meal necessarily, right? So if this type of food is served with a meal, you do have to make a separate thing. This law applies even when they are eaten at the end of the meal to assist in digesting the food, or for dessert, relieve the heaviness of the food. You also have to, even though it's somewhat connected to the meal, but because it's not part of the meal itself, you have to make its own blessing. However, they do not require a separate blessing to be recited after partaking of them if they are eaten in the midst of a meal, even when they are not eaten to help digest one's food or as dessert, are eaten solely for enjoyment. You never have to take a separate after. So, in other words, a dessert, you have an pie, you have dessert, you have a watermelon, you have grapes, right? You serve something, a dessert at the end of the meal. Those foods do have to have, you do recite a blessing before your eights, adam, or whatever it is, right? Because it's a dessert, it's not a meal. It's a lighter snack, right? So therefore, you have to make a bracha. However, you do not make it separate after blessing on those foods.
I'm assuming that all, like, let's say you have a variety of shehachol on the table, on your plate for this dessert. It covers all one shehachol bracha, will cover them all. You have in mind for it all.
Say it again?
If you have several different shehachol,
so that's
or
so this halakha is specifically talking about during mealtime with hamoitzi, right? There, the idea is the hamoitzi on the bread covers the food of the meal. The question is, what is the food of the meal, right? Is it anything I'm going to eat now before I bench? Or is it food specifically connected to the bread and to the meal? So, that dessert is not really connected to the meal. There are like dessert, something you don't eat during the meal necessarily. So it's an addition. So therefore, you have to make its own blessing. Now, if I'm not talking about a meal time, I'm just having, well, today it could be a meal, but not like halachic meal, meaning there's no bread involved, right? I'm just making a bracha on whatever food is around the table during dinner, during lunch. Then one bracha for one food covers everything else, including desserts, right? I'm making a eights because I have additional eights on my lunch. And then after I'm having a dessert that's so eights, I don't make a separate bracha. But here, it's not the hamoitzi that is all encompassing the entire meal. Here, it's every blessing, it's a regular blessing that covers other food in the same category. So shahako, and you fish, meat, or beverage, right? There, the shahako covers everything. Here, specifically, the Hamaitzi, the question is, does the Hamaitzi cover it or not? So here's
One more. You go to get a soft drink. Planning on consuming the whole, you have to go on your plate and your cup. And then a few minutes later, you didn't have in mind at all. You weren't even thinking about it. You're like, oh wait, I want to go get now some tea. Cover the tea that you did not think about, but
so that's chapter
okay.
chapter 4, chapter 5 talks about where you didn't have it in mind necessarily, it just showed up, right? So yeah, question.
Here, when you come to here, this is all types of some meat, fruit things with meat and everything.
So this is even if it has no, even if it's cooked with meat, but because it's fruit, it's a fruit dish, so we still have to get a separate bracha on it.
Even if it's
Even
couple.
meat though. Like if you say you're like taking meat, like your wife makes pineapple over there.
No, so then that's really going back to last week's chapter. Pineapple with chicken is still chicken, right? Meaning it's still yeah. Meaning this will be like the opposite. It will be like it's a fruit dish that I'm not even sure if we have something like that. An example of like you sprinkle some meat in some type of dessert. I'm not sure what that will be, but then that will be So good point. If it's like a meat dish that has some fruit in it, then that's included. But if it's like a fruit dish that has some meat in it, then that's not. That's a good point. Yeah. So now it gets a little complicated over here. What happened? Have some type of fruit, cooked fruit dish served during your meal, not necessarily as a dessert. So I'm not sure what would that be. Like if I had, meaning I know usually like you have like a bowl or a baked pear, it's usually like a sweet type of like dessert, but like what would be like a baked fruit?
I mean, I could think of it applesauce, like
But-
this during.
Yeah, but that applesauce, I mean, that's not during a meal. Like applesauce adds like, but that's a dip. Yeah.
That's only.
Apple
So I guess
crisp,
apple what?
apple crisp, blueberry
Apple
crisp,
crisp. As part of your meal or as a dessert?
as a dessert.
Right. So if it's a dessert, it's a different question. But the point is, yeah, it's not during a meal.
Like a chutney.
Hmm.
That's what it is.
So it gets
Breakfast type of meal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
so in the next 2 or 3 halachas, it kind of gets into that of what happened when the fruit comes, but it's part of the meal or it's not part of the meal. So I'm just going to jump to the end of halacha 3, right? And this is talking about when it was brought not as a dessert, but it was brought as like a main dish, baked or cooked fruit that are, meaning the idea is like this. It's a type of food, like we laid down the principle, right, at the beginning, right? If it's food that usually are eaten as a meal, then you don't make a bracha if it's brought. But if it's food that are usually not eaten during a meal, then you do make a bracha, right? But the question is, if you take food that is not usually eaten as a meal, like fruit, and you bake it and serve it part of your meal, now what do you do, right? Do you make a bracha or do you not make a bracha? So there's different opinions. So it concludes on halacha 3. Nevertheless, it is desirable to make a practice of first eating some of the fruit without bread, and hence to recite a blessing, and then to eat more, whether with or without bread. So it says you actually should make a blessing on the fruit. Don't eat it with bread, because if you eat it with bread, then you don't have to make a blessing. I mean, literally with bread. So leave the bread aside, and eat, and then you can continue eating it afterwards with bread or without bread. That is, if it's coming. I believe if it's coming as to be part of your meal, not as a dessert.
After you want.
After you wash, yeah. Then in halacha 4, it gets involved whether This is the main dish. So it's not a dish in the meal. If it's the main dish of your meal, maybe there's a different, different opinions of that as well. So that's halacha 4. We're going to skip those halachas. We're going to go to halacha 5. Okay. Try to keep to the more practical cases as we go through these chapters. Generally, it says any time that there are food in the meal that is covered by the hamoitzi, this makes no difference whether the food is on the table or not. Right, so I make hamoitzi on the bread, and then they start bringing in the food. That's fine. I don't have to make a separate blessing, right? Because I knew that they're going to serve the food, right? Well, that's when halacha 6. Okay, we'll go to halacha 6 from chapter 4. The ruling changes, however, if one knows that he did not intend to partake of the given food at all. For example, after he recited the blessing hamoitzi over bread, he was sent a gift of food from another home, upon which he was not dependent, and he did not have this gift in mind at all when reciting the blessing hamoitzi. So you said hamoitzi, and suddenly the doorbell rings. Hey, I have a gift for you. Here's some food. You weren't expecting it. Shalchman is maybe you're expecting it, right? You weren't expecting it, right? Suddenly, out of the blue, Avram shows up to my house. Hey, here's a little gift. Here's a little cake, right? Whoa, I wasn't expecting this, right? Yeah. So then you might have to make another blessing, because even though it's part of the meal, but I had no kavanah to cover this food. In this situation, the food is not covered by the blessing hamoitzi recited over the bread. This rule applies even when the present is a type of food that is served as an accompaniment to the bread, and the recipient partakes of it as accompaniment to the bread. Now, he concludes something very interesting, and I think this is what we follow, even though we don't know if this really applies to us here today in New Orleans. At present, evidently, at the time that this was written, people in our countries are generally not meticulous in their observance of this law, because it is common for people to send gifts of food to friends during a meal, even from their homes, from the homes of others. Evidently, it became a common practice. People will send gifts to each other. So even though I wasn't expecting a gift, but in my mind, in the back of my mind, I'm not going to be surprised if I got a gift. So therefore, when I made the hamoitzi, I can't say that it's only going to be on the food that I'm expecting, because I know that there may be other food that may just show up. So therefore, it covers everything. And I think, I don't know how often it happens that someone suddenly shows up with a gift of food during the meal. Sometimes if you're having guests, and the guest came after you made the hamoitzi, and they come with some fruit, or fruit, you got either way, you got to make a bracha, but they come with some dish for your food, right? So then maybe if it was expected, but I guess if it's unexpected, I guess each person on their own has to figure this out. If it's unexpected, you really, in your wildest dreams, you weren't expecting anyone to bring food during your meal. After you made the hamoitzi, then you probably would have to make a separate bracha on it.
So is it, when you say hamoitzi, does it cover all the food in your house?
Yeah, meaning anything that's part of the meal, right? Oh, if I go to the pantry and having some Lay's potato chips, that's not part of my meal. The point is, that would be a snack. That would be like same if I brought it to the table as a dessert, right? I have to make a separate bracha. Only food that is generally used as a meal. So I make hamoitzi, and it's the fish and the salads and everything on the table that's part of the meal is covered. But any dessert, like we said, is not covered. We got to make a separate bracha for dessert. And any snacks that I decide, hey, I want to go to have a piece of chocolate, I want to have some potato chips, I want to have some whatever, nuts, right? These are not part of the meal. So then I have to make a separate bracha on those things. Okay, so halacha 7 deals with beverages. And basically what it says in beverages is that no matter what type of beverage, pretty much any water or any other juice or anything that you have during the meal is covered by the hamoitzi. No matter the reason why you're drinking it. you're having soda, you're having water, you're having drinks during your meal, you don't have to make a separate blessing. I want to jump to Halacha 8. Here it deals with wine. Wine may be the exception, and we'll see later also where it talks about other alcohol, like our Jack Daniels over here. Okay, so Halacha 8. A blessing is recited over wine, by contrast, even when one drinks it during the meal. Oh, so wine is different. If I want to have a l'chaim on wine during my meal, we'll leave Kiddush aside for now. It's not Shabbos. It's a regular weekday. I washed, I had bread, I have a meal. I want to have a glass of wine. Unlike other beverages where I don't make a separate blessing shahakol on beverages, on wine I have to make a boyer pri hagafen separately, even if I already made hamayt. This ruling applies even though one drinks it to saturate the food in his digestive tract, and thus it is integral to the meal. I feel like I'm
Would that only be on Shabbos?
What?
Would that only be on Shabbos in other words, if you had wine?
Why you only say l'chaim on Shabbos?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, you did hamosi, and you made kiddush. Well, on Shabbos, you do it on Shabbos. But if it wasn't Shabbos, you wouldn't have to say hagafen, right? If you did hamosi, or would you have to say?
So this is what it's saying. That yes, it's actually the opposite. On Shabbos, you actually won't have to make hagafen because you already made hagafen at kiddush.
Yeah.
So on Shabbos, especially, we'll get to that in a moment about the kiddush on Shabbos. But we're talking about there was no kiddush. It was a weekday. It was Saturday night. It was Cholamoid. Whatever it was during the week. I washed. I'm having lunch. I washed. I'm having dinner. I'm having breakfast, and I want to say l'chaim on wine. It's David's 40th birthday, and we're having some l'chaim on wine. Right? It's a celebration. I washed. I made hamoitzi. I'm not making a shahakol on the water that I'm drinking. I'm not making a shahakol on the soda that I'm drinking. Now I'm drinking another beverage. I'm drinking wine. Do I have to make a bracha b'orei pri hagafen on the wine? And the answer is yes. Wine is the exception. That talks about even if you're drinking it because it's part of the digestive system, it's part of the meal. It's helping your food digest. Seemingly it's part of the meal. You still have to make a separate blessing. Why? The rationale is that our sages ordained a blessing for wine because of its importance. That Kiddush and Havdalah are recited over it, even in the midst of a meal. A blessing is not, however, recited after drinking wine in such an instance, since it is covered by grace. So basically, because the Chachamim already showed a special importance to wine, in the fact that because it's you make Kiddush over it and Havdalah, so it has its separate blessing, right? Seemingly, I think we spoke about this the first week. I spoke about the laws of blessing. Why does wine have its own blessing, right? Fruit juice doesn't have a separate blessing, right? You have the fruit of an orange, the fruit of an apple, the fruit of a cranberry, or fruit of whatever. They all have a shahakol, right? It's a beverage. You do shahakol. So the juice of the fruit, the juice of the grape should have the same thing. The juice of a grape is fruit juice. You should make a shahakol. No, we make a hagafen because it's special. It's unique. It's important. It's chashuv because we use it for kiddush, we use it for Havdalah, so it has its own blessing. But because the same way it has its own blessing in general, it also has its own blessing even during a meal. So even during the meal, I make a hagafen if I want to drink some wine. Now where it gets to, like on a Shabbos, if I drink wine before. So if I drink wine before,
Last paragraph.
in 8, right? If one drink wine before a meal, even if he did so before sitting down to partake of the meal, it is not necessary for him to recite a blessing over the wine he will drink within the meal. for it is covered by the blessing recited over the wine consumed before the meal. An exception to this rule, one specifically intended not to drink wine during the meal and then changed his mind and decided to drink more wine. So here's the thing. I drink wine before the meal. So let's say Kiddush is the most common case, right? Kiddush Friday night, Kiddush Shabbos day. I made a blessing hagafen on the wine. And now I wash and I want to drink more wine. So here, I already made hagafen. I already made hagafen. There's no need to make a second blessing hagafen during the meal. However, this is only if I did not intend not to drink wine during the meal. It seems like it's like only if I intended not to drink wine, meaning if I was just without any intention, it's probably fine. But if I specifically had a mind, I'm actually not going to drink more wine. I had my little cup of wine for Kiddush. Now I'm moving to hard liquor, right? I'm not drinking more wine. And then I'm thirsty for wine. I want some more wine. So now I do have to make hagafen.
The $90 to $89 bottle of wine itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The $89 bottle of wine comes out. And now you say, oh, I want to have a little. Oh, so now you got to make a new bracha, because the fact that the lack of intention, or more like the intention of not to drink more, is like an interruption. So now that bracha of hagafen specifically only includes the wine that I drank earlier, does not include the wine I drink later. So Kiddush could be even whatever, any time, right? I have wine on the table, I have a glass of wine. Then I go down, sit down for dinner. I want to have another glass of wine. Well, it depends. If I thought, yeah, maybe I'll drink some more, that's fine. Then you can drink some more without a blessing. But if I really knew in my mind, I'm just drinking one glass, that's it. And then I decide to drink another glass, then I do have to make another.
This would only apply for those who have to make it, not those here.
It's a good question. Yishai is asking, what if Yishai made a Kiddush and I heard Yishai's Kiddush? I answered Amen. Do I have to make a bracha? So I think what we said last time in regards to also other beverages, right? The shahako.
If you say amen on your yaitza,
So seemingly, if I say Amen and I'm yaitza, how am I yaitza? If I say Amen, am I allowed to drink wine? Yeah, why not? I didn't make a bracha. Oh, because your bracha is my bracha. So I made a bracha. Meaning, when someone makes a bracha hagafen and I say Amen, the reason why I'm allowed to drink wine is because it's as if I made a bracha.
mm-hmm.
So that should also carry on further. Like, why should that bracha not carry on for later? Right? See, it's the question is, if I didn't drink any wine, I just heard Kiddush from you. So then, it's not your bracha hagafen that I was yotze, it was your Kiddush that I was yotze. So then, maybe I do have to make a separate bracha. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but it just made me think of if you said amen to Kiddush, and you didn't have this is my question here. It's you didn't plan on making your own Kiddush, but then you changed your mind. Or at the time you said amen, you meant for it to cover your.
So then that may be problematic. This is a lot of Kiddush, because if you had a mind to be yotze, to be covered, then you're covered. Actually, now making your own bracha is the bracha levatala. It's the bracha in vain, because you already. Yeah, that's why also sometimes it's important to keep that in mind. Also, let's see, sometimes I know with my wife, right? Sometimes I'm davening, I'm a little late or whatever, so I make Kiddush after Emes, but sometimes I make Kiddush only 20 minutes later. So I want to tell my wife, hey, listen to your father's Kiddush. And sometimes she's not even sure. Wait, like, so you really, meaning if she didn't have a mind to be Yitzhak, this is like the opposite. If she did not have a mind to Yitzhak from Kiddush because she was waiting for me, then I say, oh, I'm going to be in 20 minutes. She says, then it's like, oh, she can't say, well, I heard from my father. Because if she did not have a mind to be Yitzhak, just hearing it is not enough. You always need the kavanah, you need the intention. If you intended to be Yitzhak, it works. If you did not intend to be Yitzhak, it does not work. So it goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We're going to skip halacha 9 because it talks about what if you switch rooms in between. And basically, the idea is that if you switch rooms, then you do have to make a separate bracha. Like if I drink wine over here before the meal, then I sat down over there for the meal, I want to drink some more wine, then I have to make a new bracha, unless when I drink the wine over here, I knew that I wanted to be in that. So something with different rooms could be a hefsek as well. That's halacha 9. Let me go to halacha 10. Yeah? Halacha 10 talks about alcoholic beverages. The following rule applies when one drinks an alcoholic beverage during a meal. So what is the reason, what is the cause, what is the reason why a person is drinking this? If one drinks it in order to whet his appetite, it is considered secondary to the meal, and it is not necessary to recite a separate blessing over it. If one drinks the alcoholic beverage in order to warm his stomach so as to better digest the food, he should recite a blessing over it, unless he recites a blessing on it or on another beverage before the meal. Where does this apply? In those regions where it's not common to drink alcoholic beverages during the meal, but rather at other times of the day to strengthen the heart. Accordingly, the law that apply to them are the same as those which apply to fruits. In these regions, however, it is common to drink alcoholic beverages during the meal. Hence, there is no need to recite a blessing on these beverages during a meal. So the first half he's talking about in certain places where people didn't generally drink alcoholic beverages during the meal. So, and that's why you can start getting into details. Well, why are you drinking it? You drink because you want to be digestive, to warm your heart, right? So as they're getting into it, so there it's not common to drink l'chaim during the meal. So then it depends why you're drinking it. If you're drinking it for the meal itself, then you don't make a separate blessing. If you're not drinking it for the meal itself, then you do make a separate blessing, just like fruits. You make a separate blessing. But in regions where it's like the common thing during the meal, you say l'chaim, it's a big deal, right? Part of the meal, then it's not a question. You do not have to make a separate blessing. So like I think the halacha is that today, I think it's a very common thing during meals to have some l'chaim, alcoholic beverages. So one need not make a separate blessing on these l'chaims.
So they just made a parallel with the dessert. Is that same?
That parallel is for in regions where they don't generally drink
Right.
during the meal. Yeah.
So while we were saying this, I just thought like they have these little tea parties where they'll have sandwiches, cakes, and fruit all together as part of the meal. Like it's all part of the meal.
Right.
And it's very customary to have it all at the same time. Would that be an example where you wouldn't say a separate bracha for a dessert because it's all part of the meal at the same time?
Good question. I think those types of parties, it's not really during the meal. It's more like we're serving lots of food. We're serving more satiating food. We're serving more like dessert, snack types of food, and everyone kind of eats what they want at the same time. It's like that. So I don't think the fruit is meant to be as your meal. It's meant to be as a lighter option, right? So then you still make a separate blessing. Like you make a hamotzi on the sandwich, and then you want to have a cake, you make a mezainis. You want to have some fruit, you make a eitz. The question over here is more like a certain type of dish where you're taking fruit and you're making it into a main dish. Then it's like, hey, what is this? It's fruit, but it's being served as a meal. Having some fruit out during one of these places where everyone's like having a little thing of fruit and they also have some fruits, it's still fruit. It's a lighter option. It's still fruit, so you make eitz. Yeah.
And if you make hagafen during the meal, it covers all drinks, right?
Hagafen covers all things. Well, drinks either way is covered. The halacha, the only drink that's not covered is wine. I'm saying back in the day, in those places, you would have, if you would drink wine, then you could also drink l'chaim without making a shaka. But for us, its conclusion is that if it's a common thing to drink alcoholic beverages during a meal, you don't have to make a separate blessing. Now, so here in Halacha Yud Aleph, it talks about what happens if I drink before the meal. And now I'm about to start the meal. Do I have to make a separate after blessing before the meal? Halacha Yud Aleph, Halacha 11. The blessing recited over any beverages other than wine, which one drinks before his meal, does not cover the beverages drunk during or after the meal, even though one has in mind to drink them during the meal. It is necessary to recite a blessing after drinking these beverages before the meal if one drank an amount that requires a blessing to be recited. So basically, it's two separate things. The drinking before the meal and drinking during or after the meal, it cannot be combined, and therefore the after blessing has to be recited before the meal. If you drink the shear, which is a revius, which is whatever 3.5 ounces of a beverage, which is a lot, right? So if you drink that before the meal, you have to make a separate after blessing. The after blessing is a shorter one, right? The burden of fasha, it's a shorter blessing, but it has to be made before because it's not covered. It's not combined to the drinking of the meal itself. So if I make the long benching and after the meal, it doesn't cover what I drink before the meal. Chutz min hayayin. The exception is again wine, because wine is, even if you're drinking it before the meal, it always helps. It helps the meal itself. It helps the person's appetite, and therefore it's part of the meal. So even if I drink it before, you don't have to make an after blessing. That's why you have it with kiddush, right? I make kiddush. I drink a cup of wine. I don't make an after blessing before I wash for a mitzi, because the wine is considered one thing with the meal. But other beverages, I would have to. By the way, it's just an interesting thing that we find on, let's say, on Rosh Hashanah. This is not beverages, this is food. On Rosh Hashanah, custom is of the second night of Rosh Hashanah, because we have the whole situation with the Shechiyanu on the second night. So what do we do right after Kiddush?
A new
We make
fruit.
a blessing on a new fruit, Shechiyanu, right? So it says that you should try to eat less than a kazayas. Because if you eat more than a kazayas, you do have to make a separate after blessing. Right? Perhaps you would have to make a separate after blessing. That is in regards to eating, but with the beverages as well, you do have to make a separate after blessing if you drink that amount, unless you drink one.
So if you.
And by the way, the same thing applies to alcohol, because also it helps the justice system. Yeah, David.
If you're supposed to stay on blessing and you forgot to, and then you went into like another, like that situation where, say about after or there's something you drank before, and then you said motzi in the middle of the meal. Could you say, it's supposed to say this after bracha can you say that in the middle of the meal?
It's a great question. I'm pretty sure it talks about it, and I think you do have to.
Yeah,
But
while I'm at it, how far, like in the middle of the night, like, oh wait, I was supposed to say it afterward. That'd be too late. Like,
yeah, so that's the last.
What's the cutoff?
Good question. That's the last halacha in chapter 5. I hope to get it
Okay.
tonight. What time is it now?
See, I
10:15.
you can tell.
Okay,
I want us to get there.
So we know where we're headed. Okay. Right. So that's basically the chapter 4. I see the halacha 13 is basically. Sorry, I'm skipping here. So, I want to do halacha 12. Here's an interesting halacha about kiddush. Right, we said before that we don't have to make a separate blessing because kiddush is always connected to the meal. I want to start from the second paragraph, or in English it's not the second paragraph. We're talking about havdalah. When by contrast one recites havdalah over wine and did not at all intend to drink wine after. During the ensuing meal, he must recite a blessing after the wine, since the wine of Abdullah is not intended to whet his appetite for food, but is drunk only for the sake of fulfilling the mitzvah. We're in the middle of halacha 12, right? So Havdalah, right? So Kiddush always has to be connected to a meal, right? So Kiddush is always, so I don't have to make a separate after the blessing because it's part of the meal that ensues afterwards. But the Havdalah is not necessarily connected to the meal. Havdalah you're making because it's a mitzvah, you're making Havdalah on wine. But now I sit down for right after Abdullah. So here, do I have to make a separate after blessing after the wine? And the answer is yes, I do.
And after blessing for the Havdalah.
Here's going to what for the Havdalah, right? Here's what going to what David asked before. Moreover, even if one forgot to recite the blessing after drinking wine before starting the meal and remembered in the middle of the meal before reciting grace, he must recite the blessing then. Meaning, middle of the meal, he said, "Oh yeah, I forgot to make an after blessing after the wine, after the Havdalah wine." So stop in the middle of the meal and make the after blessing. However, if you plan on benching with a cup of wine, you have a mezuzah, and you're making hagafen on the wine, and after that hagafen, you're going to have to say an after blessing for the wine, and then that one after blessing for wine could cover also the wine from before the meal. But if you're not planning on doing that, then even during the meal, you have to make an after blessing on the wine. But I'm sorry, but he points out over here that once you bench, you don't have to make an after blessing, because benching itself covers it, meaning once you bench the long benching, you don't have to go back and say, "Oh, I have to make now the shorter blessing for the wine from before the meal." But before you bench, it's better to first say the after blessing for the wine before the meal, and then you bench for the wine for the food of the meal. Same thing applies also for like I mentioned, like eating fruit or dessert before the meal. That if the purpose of this food is like an appetizer to get your stomach prepared for the meal, then you don't have to make a separate after blessing. But if you're doing it just for a snack, for sweets, whatever it is, then you do have to make an after blessing like you do on the wine. Okay, so that is chapter 4. I'm gonna be quiet today.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's go on to chapter 5. There's 9 halachas in chapter 5. We'll see how many of it we'll do. Okay. So chapter 5, the laws governing a person who changes his mind in the course of. Okay. So what happens? The idea is we make a bracha, right? This a rabbinic mitzvah to make a bracha before we
I
eat.
do this all the
And
time, by the way.
Change your mind. Okay, look at that. So this is Abraham's chapter.
Yeah.
So the idea of a bracha is that the bracha covers the food and kind of allows us to partake, to benefit from God's world, right? So He gave me the right to drink a coffee. I say a bracha, that God creates everything through His word. Oh, that's like kind of recognizing that this isn't God, so giving it to me, so I could drink my coffee, right? But a lot of it really, like as we see in these last few chapters, a lot of it depends on my intention, right? So if I intended to drink it, I could drink it. If I did not intend to drink it, then the blessing is not giving me that permission to drink it, right? So what happens if I made a blessing? Then my intention is I'm going to stop eating it now. So that cuts off my blessing permission, so to say, right?
Mhm.
Now I'll continue eating. Or kind of just pull off that previous blessing and continue eating, right? So this is what the chapter really deals with. I made the blessing and I changed my mind and I intended to stop eating, then I changed my mind, I want to continue eating. But it lays down, it kind of lays down the rule right at the beginning, and then it goes into the many details of the halacha. So halacha Aleph, chapter 5, halacha 1. If a person was eating or drinking and decided not to eat or drink more, but afterwards changed his mind and decided to continue, so what? He must always recite a second blessing. So that's the general rule. The general rule is you have mind to stop eating. I want to continue eating. Actually, one piece of that Danish. Actually, one piece of the whatever. Then I have to make a new blessing.
Do you the closer blessing before you do the blessing?
Blessing.
We'll get into that.
It's all my intention.
You say the after blessing from the. I don't think so. But it gets into lots of details over here. However, the only exception to this rule is when one is eating a meal that includes bread. In such a situation, even if one decided not to eat anymore, he is not considered to have diverted his attention entirely from eating. The rationale is that if it is common for a person to linger and be drawn from one course to another, indeed, there are times when a person sits down to eat a small meal and continues eating until he has taken of a large meal. I can tell you a lot about that. That you sit down and have a little whatever, and then once you're sitting and eating, it kind of lingers and you kind of continue
Eat
eating.
more and more and more.
Exactly, right? So halachically, this only applies when it's a meal of bread. This is just the halachic definition of a meal, right? We have many meals, but we don't have bread. We just sit down and we have steak, we have chicken, we have fish, we have whatever it is, right? It's a meal for us. But the halachically, a meal definition of a meal is when we're eating bread. So this halacha applies when there's a meal with bread. They look in the Hebrew, you see it's also in the parentheses, right? This rule applies at a meal, right? And only the add in the parentheses that includes bread, because it doesn't even have to be specified every time in the halacha. When you say meal, it means bread. In English, just to clarify, but in the Hebrew, it just says su'udah, chutz, right? If you're having a su'udah means a meal. Meal means bread. If you're having bread, you're having a meal. And then, so you know what, I'm done eating. But then you say, then you decide you want to continue eating. Then you do not have to make another bracha.
I have a question. It's I might have missed it on one of your earlier there. If you have, in other words, this is not a meal. This is just you eating snacks or whatever, and you have a bowl of fruit, and you have ho'etz, but you have ho'adamah, all in the same deal. Several varieties. Do you have to say just one bracha on ho'adamah and then one bracha on ho'etz, and it will cover several varieties of ho'etz or ho'adamah?
Yeah, you're talking about during a meal. You're talking about
No, not a meal. Not a meal.
Yeah.
Not
If
with
there's
bread.
no meal, then you just say one bracha of each category, and then it covers everything in that category. Okay, and the second half of halacha 1 is that the only time that during a meal that you would have to make another bracha if you change your mind, if there was literally there wasn't any food in the house, right? And suddenly they brought more food. They went to the store. They brought more food. Oh, they're here. So you put both together. In my mind, I had a mind to stop eating, and there wasn't really any food even to serve. And now suddenly they brought food out of the blue. Then that would be a case that perhaps you would have to make another bracha. Okay. This is all, by the way, one opinion, just to get to know that, right? This is one opinion. One opinion says that when it comes to food during a meal, unless there are a few exceptions, generally we do not have to make another bracha. However, they differentiate between food and beverages. So if the beverage there, if you had a mind to stop drinking during your meal, then you do have to make a new bracha, because it's not common to continue drinking and drinking and drinking. All right, that's what it says in Halacha 3. All this applies to eating within a meal. Different rules apply to drinking. If a person decides not to drink more and then changes his mind, he is required to recite another blessing, even if he did not make an explicit decision not to drink more, but merely said, bring a cup of wine so that we can recite grace after me. Right? So someone says, hey, let's bench. Right? Oh, someone announced we're benching. That means we're not going to drink anymore. Bring a cup. We got to do the zimmun. Right? We got to get ready for benching. That itself is enough to say we're not drinking anymore. And therefore, if you want to continue drinking, you got to make another bracha. According to this opinion, which we'll see the second opinion, according to this opinion, you are still allowed to eat because it's still common to continue eating. So you could eat without another bracha, but you can't drink without another bracha.
This is when people are answering for
Right. My point is, he's just giving an example of what it means that you decided that you finished the meal. You say, "Hey, let's go bench." Right. Basically, hey, we're done eating and done drinking. So according to the first opinion, that you are allowed to continue eating because it's a meal, because you washed. However, if you do want to continue drinking, you have to make a new bracha. You do not have to make an after blessing, but you have to make a new bracha on whatever you want to drink. Now, I want to skip towards the end of Halacha 3, where it says the other opinion. And this the Alter Rebbe does this many times. He kind of gives you a long, lengthy, one opinion, and you think this is the final halacha, and then say, "Oh, this is only one opinion. This is another opinion." Right? So this way, those over here as well. There are other authorities, however, who maintain that there is no difference between eating and drinking in this regard, even when eating and even when one sat down to eat a meal in a fixed setting. If one diverted his attention from eating more and then he changed his mind and decided to eat more bread or other food that are served because of the meal, he is required to recite a second blessing. So the same thing applies equally to drinks, to beverages, and to food. You always have to make a second blessing if you changed your mind. So what do you do? What's the halacha? So the Alter Rebbe tells us, because we have two opinions over here, what should we do? It is desirable to give weight to their words, and not to return to eat at all. One should not, however, return and eat again and recite a second blessing, because it may be a blessing recited in vain. Because there are two opinions. One opinion says you do not have to make a second blessing. The other opinion says you have to make a second blessing. The best thing to do is don't eat.
Don't.
Eating with a blessing, you're putting yourself in maybe it's a blessing in vain. Maybe you don't need to make a second blessing, right? Therefore, it says once you said let's bench, let's say Shir Hamali, let's get up, right? Once you made this announcement that you're basically done eating, or even in your mind you really decided, okay, I'm done, then you should continue eating or drinking. I'm sorry, you shouldn't continue eating. If you want to continue drinking, you could if you make another problem. So there's no problem continuing to drink as long as you make a shahak. Only you continue drinking. But there is a problem to continue eating. So the best thing is not to eat anything else. If you want to take a drink, make a shahakal and continue drinking.
What if you go about 72 minutes?
Oh,
Okay.
we'll get to the 7 minutes in a moment. We'll get to that in a moment. That's the last halacha that Dave is waiting to hear. But that's a good point. It's 72 minutes. Okay. Now, the Alter Rebbe says that this only applies where we just made an announcement. Hey, let's get ready to bench. What happens if you actually picked up the cup? You started to bench, or about to start benching, right? You actually not just verbally said something, but you actually did an action. You actually pick up the cup, getting ready to bench. Halacha 4. All authorities agree that if a person took a cup of wine in hand to recite grace, even if he did not wash his hands before grace, nor did he say bring a cup of wine so that he can recite grace, he is considered, but he didn't make any proclamation, didn't make any announcements. All he did is he picked up the cup to bench. He is considered to have withdrawn from the meal and diverted his attention from eating entirely. Therefore, he must recite a blessing before eating or drinking anything else, according to all opinions. Here, there's no machlekes, there's no dispute. According to both opinions, it's considered that you diverted your attention. So now, if you do want to continue eating, you have to make a bracha, but you could make a bracha, right? Is that what I'm saying? Is going on over here? It's like this. In other words, if you just verbally said something which is kind of a little bit vague, right? You said, "Hey, let's bench," or "Bring the cup because we gotta prepare for benching," right? You just said that, and I think the same thing will apply if, like you said, the Shir Hamali, like you said, like the first paragraph of benching, right? You just said something. Then there's two opinions in regards to eating, whether you do have to make another bracha or whether you don't have to make another bracha. So because there are two opinions, the Alter Rebbe says, just stay away from it, don't eat. However, if you actually, not just you said you want to go bench, you actually picked up the cup, you're about to start benching. Pick up the cup is symbolizing that you're getting ready to bench, right, on the cup of wine. Then according to all opinions, you really diverted your attention. You really had in mind that you're not eating anymore. So now if you say, you know what, I want to have another bite. Now you could with a blessing. Because there's no two opinions here. Everyone agrees that you have to make another blessing. So if you want, you can continue eating, but you have to make another blessing. And here's where it gets a little complicated. And you have to make a separate after blessing, because whatever you eat now is like a new meal. And you take it a step further, in Halacha Hey it says you actually have to wash your hands again. Sorry, in Halacha 6, you actually have to wash hamotzi again. Basically, it's almost not worth it. It's almost not worth it. Meaning because you diverted your attention, now you basically cut off the meal. Now you're starting a new meal. So if you don't want to bench, you can wash your hands again, make hamotzi, continue eating.
That was it.
What do you do about the first bench? Hey, don't you still need to do that?
What's-
It's not a mosquito, it's like not like
I'm not sure what's the second paragraph of Halacha 4 I'm looking at. It talks here about
every Shabbos, we have a kiddush, we fall into this category because some people are ready to bench, some people are not ready to bench, some people eating after 72 minutes. You got a lot of variables happening at the same time.
yeah.
We don't ever have lunch together anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry. So let me clarify that. Thank you, Rabbi Green. So I picked up a cup, exactly like Avraham is saying, right? Okay, we're gonna bench now. I pick up a cup, and then Adam starts screaming, and then someone else is going, all right, the leveling is happening. I say, you know what, we're not gonna bench right now. Let's continue preparing for a little bit, right? And I want to continue eating. So now it's like a new meal. So if I want to eat bread, I gotta wash my hands on moitzi, and I can make a bracha on moitzi, and I can eat the bread. What if I don't want to eat? I want to have some I want to have some cholent. I want to have some, I don't know, some chicken. I want to have some potatoes, right? So here I don't have to make a moitzi, but I do have to make whatever bracha that is. It's like a new meal.
Like the dessert, right? Almost like the dessert.
It's more than a dessert, because a dessert doesn't its own appetite. Here, so if I continue to eat bread, then we'll make a separate. Let's do the regular. But what if I have or in the the shorter half the blessing, and then the longer wheel covers everything. So if I decide to continue eating, I'll have to make a separate blessing before and a separate blessing after, other than the actual bread, which is included. So that's what I'm thinking. The second half, what I mean inside, the second half of level 4. Moreover, in this instance, he must also recite a blessing after partaking of any food served because of the meal, meaning not the bread itself. Other foods that are served before reciting the eating is considered partaking of another meal because he has diverted his attention from thinking. Basically, it's like another meal within this meal that you have to make a bracha, and that's why it says Halacha 6. It says whenever a person the diversion of attention requires him to recite the blessing of Halacha again, he must also wash his hands in the manner appropriate for eating. He also has to wash his hands and basically. Exactly. The truth is, like Abraham said, it's open and it's a lot of people, unfortunately, many people do not know this. Because exactly, you change minds. You what has to be. Truth is, so because both ways. What happened then we see in Halacha 7, if you're if you eat someone if you eat not sure in a short that because we're kind of when they want. But there's this concept that when you eat someone's house, you kind of care of the house. But after they decide that it was over and vice versa, you decide it's over, but they don't decide it's over, then you could continue eating because ultimately you're really part of their meal. It's not your meal. Let me just decide in Halacha 7. We're doing Halacha 7, chapter 5. If the meal's host said, let us recite grace. All the participants in the meal are permitted to drink further without reciting a blessing, provided that they remain silent, indicating that their consent to his words. So if Yishai is the host, Yishai says, okay, we're ready to the bench. And I say to David, I'm going to continue. That's fine, because I express my intention that I'm not stopping to eat right now. But if everyone was quiet, meaning everyone kind of, okay, we'll stop eating now. And then I say, no, I wanted to, one other drink some diet barks, right? Because he decided the meal is over. So the meal is over for all the guests. And we continue eating, we have to make a new bracha. If, however, one of the guests or one of the members of the household suggested reciting grace, so if Yishai is not the host, if David's the host, then Yishai now takes on the left bench. Even the person who made the statement may retract the statement and drink it together with the host. Without saying another bracha, what's the rationale? Is that the guest or household member knows that the matter is not dependent on him, but on the host. Like your house, you don't make decisions here. Who asked you to make the decision, right? This announcement, right? So basically, only the host really decides when the meal, and since the host did not divert his attention from drinking, even the one who suggested reciting the grace is considered as having agreed with his host and consented to continue to drink with him. So even when we made the announcement, still able to continue eating. And how does that work in a shul? At a large Kiddush, I don't think this halacha will apply because ultimately everyone has the ability to kind of leave when they want. That's usually what happens. Not like there's an end time when everyone finishes eating. It's other communities where it's like more filled, but we're like now everyone's benching together, and now the meal is over, and that's when everyone leaves. Nobody leaves before. Then maybe this halacha will apply. But in the shul, where like people kind of on their own, in and out, everyone kind of finishes whenever they want to finish eating and they leave. Man, I don't think this halacha would apply. So everyone on their own, when they decide that they're finishing eating, then they will have to make a new bracha. They want to continue eating. And the same thing applies in halacha 8 is when you're eating in someone's house and not necessarily during the meal, or maybe during the meal with the serving dessert. I mean, different types of foods are coming out, right? So that in the general halacha is that when I make a bracha, let's say on an apple, it only applies to the apple that I'm planning on eating, right? If a new apple shows up, I gotta make a new bracha. I wouldn't eat that. But if I'm sitting on your table, then I make a bracha whatever's on the table, and then suddenly a new tray of food comes to the table, I don't have to make a new bracha because I don't have intent. My intention is whatever is going to be served. It's not my house, so I don't know what's going to be served. Whatever is going to be served, that's what I'm going to eat. So therefore, even if more and more food is coming out, I don't have to make a new bracha on every on one of these foods. Let's finally get to the last halacha test. Okay, halacha 9. This is the halacha David is really important. This talks about what Abraham was talking about with the 72 minutes, even though it does not mention it directly over here. Okay. One may not recite any blessing after eating, even grace, which is a scriptural obligation, a biblical obligation. Right? As we mentioned, right, that after blessing that when we eat and we are satiated on bread, then there's a biblical obligation to bench, or otherwise it's only rabbinic. So any after blessing, even if it is the grace after meal, which is biblical, we may not recite these blessings unless the food in one's digestive system has not begun to be digested. doctors here, they know how long it takes. Similarly, what one eats at two different times may not be covered within one blessing unless he has not waited an amount of time between eating the two foods sufficient for the first food to be digested.
It's 72 minutes.
If one then wait this long, he is required to recite another blessing on the second food. Similar laws apply with regards to one who wishes to cover beverages he drinks at two different times with one blessing and delays between them long enough for the first beverage to be digested. How long is the time it takes food or drink to be digested? As long as one is not hungry again after eating the food he first ate, or thirsty again after drinking beverage he first ate. So here, the Alter Rebbe does not give us the 72-minute rule. The 72-minute rule, I believe, is in the Shulchan Aruch. Give me a second to find the view. Here the Alter Rebbe says, as long as you're not hungry or thirsty, you ate, you were satiated, and you're not hungry now. If the food was digested, you'll be hungry again. Or somewhat hungry, right? If you're not hungry, so it means that the food hasn't been digested yet, and therefore you could make an after blessing. Or you could continue eating the same category of food without making a new blessing. But it's still like, it's combined. But if it's that long, we're like, I don't even have the food in the system anymore. Then I do have to make a new before blessing, and I cannot make an after blessing anymore. Give me a second. In 183, Halacha 3. So 184. Halacha 3 says over here. Oh, so over here it says like this. In the actual Shulchan Aruch, he says he goes into a little greater detail. He says, if you're fully satiated, when you had a full meal and it really filled you up, then as long as you still feel somewhat satiated, you're not really hungry, then you could still make an after blessing. But what happens if you never really fully ate? You had a snack, whatever. You never fully, satiated, right? So 10 minutes later, you could be hungry again, right? I've had a bite of a cherry. I made her eat. I had a cherry, meaning 2 minutes later, it never filled me. I've never satiated from it, right? It's just a little thing, right? So when can I make a new blessing, right? So here it says, or if I'm just eating every few minutes, another bite. Here it says, we have a share of the time it takes to walk 4 mil. Mil is a measurement, like just around a kilometer. Just around a kilometer. So it's about the time it takes to walk 4 kilometers. And it says it is an hour and a fifth of an hour. So if an hour is 60 minutes, how many minutes is a fifth? It's 12. So 12 plus thing is 72 minutes. So that's what Abraham was saying, the 72-minute rule. So what's the 72-minute rule? The 72-minute rule is that an hour and 12 minutes later, you still could, it's still somewhat connected. You can make the after blessing. Or if you want to continue eating, you don't have to make a new blessing. You're sitting around by you're sitting around by a party, and it's been 2-3 hours. As long as every few minutes
Take a little sip.
That's fine, right? 72 minutes go by without eating or drinking anything, then it's a really good meal. It's like that's an interruption, right? And if you got to make a new blessing, you can't make an after blessing anymore. But if less than 72 minutes, then it is still connected, combines.
Let's say you delay finishing past 72 minutes. You're not planning on eating anything, but you just delayed it.
You haven't eaten
And
for
now
72
you're
minutes.
on Shabbos. And you're like, oh, I forgot the bench.
What to do? You got the bench, just 72 minutes went by. It's done. Yeah. What you could do is you could wash again, have a white tea, and then. But I'm not sure if you have to. I'm not sure if you have to do that.
Yeah, if you keep eating a little
But
bit.
if you don't. it's
Right,
done.
right, yeah.
You should continue eating, at least something, munch on something, to kind of prolong that time. Later, you feel you're full, you're not hungry. Then you can continue eating, and then you can just make up after less even longer. 72 minutes is when you cannot gauge about, you don't feel the how satiated you are, where you can't really feel whether it's being digested or not. Then we say, count 72 minutes. It's like an average time. But if you still feel full, maybe you can still make it.
You just cut out?
Yep.
Is it?
Oh, he's coming back.
There, I got that from.
We just lost you. It didn't.
First one. You hear me now?
No, I can hear you. Yes, I
It's
can.
not clear.
Can't see. The pitch is black.
Can't see me.
Now I can. But
I
it's
see
kind of-
you. I see you.
I can see you, but
Okay. So we'll stop. We'll stop over here. We'll stop over here. That was we did 2 chapters. And next chapter, chapter 6, we deal with the laws of fruit. What exactly is considered a fruit? What's a vegetable? Different type of blessing. To know different plants and different trees. To know it's the category in the laws of fruits and vegetables. So that is next week in Rich Hashem.
Thank you.
Shakuach. Thank you.
Take care. Ram Sarchaya. All the best.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All the best.